Hey guys, this is the mind of Lilith and thank you for joining me today. I wanted to quickly share my thoughts about this Chicago Purge law that's been circulating in the news for the past several days. I haven't read much about the story. I've been too busy to do so, but I will say this. The Black community does not have any control over its resources. We don't control the education system. We don't control the food supply. We don't control the stores, the healthcare system, policing. We don't control any element within our community besides reproduction. That's it. Okay? And consumption. We control reproduction and consumption, right? So when we hear about legislative changes that may affect our community, a lot of us become paranoid or alarmed because we know how vulnerable we are, right? The women and children in the majority of the Black communities in the United States are not protected. They are vulnerable to attack by a lot of external forces, whether it's gangs or wayward men or the government policies, whatever, right? So what happens is when these laws are passed, the laws are not the problem, in my opinion. The laws are the symptom of a problem, okay? Whatever changes are made to the government or to our communities even, we should be impervious to them. But we know we are not because we do not have the socioeconomic or cultural infrastructure to protect ourselves from our enemies. The enemies can be internal or external. So our communities are more vulnerable to sudden changes in legislation. And this is what the Democrats and Republicans have been using against Black people for the past 60, 70 years. They know we're not secure. They know we're dependent on them for our education, for our food, for our protection. They know all of these things. So they're going to create narratives that are alarmist, okay? When someone from the outside can change the way you feel about yourself, that means that you are insecure. And as a community, we are very insecure. And we're insecure because, again, we don't control anything. We don't own anything. We are consumers and we are breeders. That is it. The only thing we control in our community is what we buy and who we have sex with and who we have babies with. That is all, right? And so because we know we're vulnerable like rabbits in the wild, what we do is we become very skittish and we become very anxious when things change. And we are rightfully nervous when things change because unfortunately, things usually change in ways that are destabilizing to the Black community because we don't control anything. That was the purpose of social integration, to make sure that we did not have the wherewithal, the resources, the education, or the desire to build among each other. We wanted to integrate into the larger society, and we wanted the government to protect us more than we wanted to protect ourselves from each other and the government. We hold the government more accountable to take care of us and our children and our communities more than we hold the men we have children with accountable to take care of their responsibilities. And so when the government says, I'm going to wave my wand and do this, I'm going to change this law, I'm going to allow gentrification in your communities, I'm going to redline your communities, we feel, especially the women, we feel more vulnerable because we can't control any of those things because we're renters by and large, right? We're renters, and even if we own property, the government can rezone your neighborhood and turn your $500,000 home into some $250,000 home next to the highways and the projects and the crack houses and other elements that generally bring down property value. I mean, there are dozens of stories of Black couples getting their property valuated, and the property value is assessed at 40% below market value. And so the Black couple has to, have a white couple represent them when the property assessor comes in to look at the home. This is because we don't control the banks. We don't control any real estate, real value, real money. Yes, we may have property and we have money in the bank, but we don't really control it, right? We have seen how the government takes thriving communities and turns them into ghettos by building highways in the middle of the community, by taking the jobs and the resources out of those communities, by introducing drugs and alcohol and guns and gangs into those communities. We know we have no control. So unfortunately, a lot of us will continue to feel like sitting ducks until we decide as a collective to rebuild our villages. What happened in the past 50 years is that when we would hold people accountable for presenting negative messages to our children through the music and the media, these individuals would say, it's up to the parents to raise the children. No, it's up to the parents and the village to raise the children. As a community, we have stopped supporting the village concept. It's now you're all on your own, okay? Your mama was a crackhead, your uncle's a crackhead, everybody's in the communities on drugs, right? You no longer have a village. You have a hood where a bunch of people are just surviving, and the children are being born into poverty and trauma and chaos because nobody cares about each other anymore. All they're chasing is the next high, right? Whether it's drugs or sex or whatever, okay? So because that is an issue, and it's been an issue for the past 50 years, we have even less socioeconomic support. For the past 50, 60 years, the Black community has been chasing pleasure instead of happiness. Pleasure comes from drugs. Happiness comes from the fulfillment of raising your children in a safe community and teaching your children principles and values to make them productive members of society. We have been chasing temporary happiness with the drugs and the sex and the crazy music, right, for the past 50, 60 years. And the chickens are coming home to roost because now the rents are getting higher, okay? Jobs are getting more scarce, or they're not paying enough money to sustain a family. Relationship dynamics are trash because, again, our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents even were chasing pleasures in the 60s and 70s and 80s with the drugs and alcohol and sex. And now, 50, 60 years later, you know, it's wintertime. It's wintertime. And so now, the ants who have been building for the past 50 years, right? Communities and peoples and cultures who invested their time, energy, and resources and poured into their children and poured into their village and their community and weren't backbiting and killing each other and selling dope and poison and destruction to their communities, they're largely secure. Okay, they feel more secure about their position in society. Unfortunately, the Black community, by and large, not every Black person, not every Black community, but the Black community is like, you know, on a life raft in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, not the Pacific Ocean where it's calm and pretty. No, the torrid and violent waves of the Atlantic. That is where we are, okay? And so we're unstable. And we're going to continue to be unstable until we figure out, oh, we got to do this together. We got to rebuild the village and not just put it on individual parents to raise their kids. Back in the day, the village raised the children. What happened to that? What happened to it takes the village to raise a child? It now goes to, nah, it's the parents' responsibility. It ain't my responsibility. I'm not a leader. I'm just a rapper. I'm just an entertainer. I'm not a role model. Even though your child sees me every freaking day and aspires to be me, that's not what I signed up for. You do your job, right? And what a lot of these rappers and entertainers and these magicians who work in the record industry, what they are failing to acknowledge is the fact that the environment has a greater influence on a child than the home itself. The home is only one house in astrology, or it could be 2 or 3, depends on your perspective. But the home is only one house. Once you step outside the home, there are 11 other houses that you have to contend with. Your environment, okay? Your friend's environment, working environment, your community in general, the global stage, right? Your environment has more of an impact on you than your parents. This is why there are so many children who are raised in good homes, quote unquote good homes, who fall victim to the streets anyway. Because at a certain age, a child wants to belong to something greater than itself, right? A child seeks to find its identity away from the home. That is what adolescence and puberty is about. And it is not a coincidence that the adolescent to young teenage to young adult demographic is who advertising executives and music executives and artists target. They know that, you know, by the time the child turns 13, 14, 15, they're stepping away from the parents and now they're finding camaraderie and identity among their peer group, okay? Everybody knows this. Every sociologist knows this. Every psychologist knows this. And most of these people who work in the record industry are industrial psychologists, okay? They need to understand psychology to market to their consumer base. Period. They know who to market to. So for them to say, it's not about the village, it's about the individual parents, while they're targeting these children as they're stepping away from their parents and adolescents, is the problem. It's obvious that there's an agenda to poison the children by poisoning the village, okay? The village is where most of these kids learn about, you know, secular influences, right? Music and culture and TV. When I was a kid, I didn't watch TV. I didn't listen to pop music of that particular era, but I learned all the songs that were on the radio at the time from my peer group, from walking down the street and hearing hearing people bumping songs in their cars, okay? The media influence is in the external environment, right? The environment outside the home. So no matter how hard the parents work to shelter the children need to be socialized, right? And in this society, we encourage socialization by interacting with other people, other children, other families in our neighborhoods. But if everybody's being poisoned by the media and the culture, then you're going to have children who grow up to chase pleasure, just like their parents did and their grandparents did in the 70s when they were promoting pimp culture, in the 80s when everybody was doing coke and heroin, in the 90s when everybody was promoting gangster rap and hoism. All of this degeneracy has been programmed into our culture. It is now the village. The village is no longer a safe haven where children are protected. It is a place where children are preyed upon by drug addicts and hoes. Okay, by drug dealers in their 20s and 30s going after high school girls, and by women in their 20s and 30s going after teenage boys, trying to turn them out because they don't want to be single, and they know that this teenage boy doesn't have the wherewithal to know that he's being preyed upon. This is what has happened to our village. Okay, so back to my original point. The purge law isn't necessarily a problem. It's the symptom of a problem. I think many black people were afraid that criminals who are violent, they would be allowed to roam the streets free and commit more crimes. And the reason why this is a legitimate fear is because, as I stated earlier, we have no control over any element in our community besides consumption and reproduction. Period. So we don't control protection and security. We don't control education, healthcare, food production, nothing. So now, if the violent goons are being released from jail, we don't have community leaders who will say, listen, I need you 4 guys to watch this block, and we're going to have this whole area mapped out to protect the children from these violent predators. That's what our job is. We don't have men doing that because the U.S. government conspired with the state governments to destroy any sort of community policing in our neighborhoods, because they realized that if we have the power to defend ourselves from them, then we wouldn't be dependent on them for anything. Because once you can defend yourself from your enemy, you can now create systems based on your level of defense, right? If you can't defend it, you don't really own it. Now, do you? So if the black community had a self-sustaining defense system that wasn't dependent on external forces, then we can create infrastructure, socioeconomic infrastructure, education, healthcare, and other resources that we need as a community that we'll be able to defend, because the defense system will be built into the infrastructure of that community, right? If you don't have a defense system, you don't have sustainability, you don't have longevity. When you have a defense system, you're able to protect the things that you built, right? And again, when you have a defensive mindset, you're able to protect yourself from outside enemies. You are able to equip your children with the knowledge and the education that they need to further fortify the community. You're able to grow your own food to sustain the health of the members of the community, because you understand how important defense is. Defense isn't just of guns and weapons and bombs. No, defense is ideological. Okay, defense is about nutrition. Defense is about child rearing, right? So without these systems put in place, the drug dealers, the gang members, the pedophiles, the rapists, the killers, they have carte blanche and free reign over the community. They can do whatever the hell they want to do, and we have no protection. So when these laws are passed, whatever they are, we're automatically either overly excited or too optimistic, or we're paranoid and scared and fearful because we have no control over anything. We don't have control over the bail system. We don't have control over any prisons. Are there any black-owned prisons in the United States? No, there are not. I'm sure there aren't, right? And by the way, please do not confuse black gang members with militias. Militias have organization. They have strategy. They have professional training, right? They have objectives, okay? Gang members are just surviving off of the rabbits in the community who are helpless and they have no protection. That's their job. They're predators. They're not protecting anything. So unfortunately, we have gangs, but we don't have community policing. It was really easy for the government to infiltrate the Black Panthers, but they have not infiltrated these Crips and these Bloods yet. I wonder why. All these gangs in the United States in the black community killing our people, and it hasn't been dismantled, but the Black Panthers were pretty much eviscerated within a decade. And we've had Bloods and Crips for 50 years now. 50 years. Okay? So yeah, we know what it is already. We know that we have no protection. We know we have no provision. I'm talking about the men and the women. So the solution is for us to become self-sufficient, to build our own communities, to bring back the village mindset that we once had as a community. Pastor Dowell has a YouTube channel, and I think he's in Tennessee, and he's doing this work. He has a church, and the church purchased like a couple acres of land, and they're growing their own food. And the church community, they're all contributing to building this village. And the village is centered on biblical principles. I think he calls himself a Hebrew Israelite. But he has the right idea and concept, right? He is somebody who says, you know what? I don't want the government in charge of my life. So I'm going to take leadership, and I'm going to create a community for the women and the children, no matter what race you are. Okay, doesn't matter anything. As long as you agree to the core Christian principles of hard work, brotherhood, love for mankind, gender roles, that's something else, but it is what it is, right? And you know, and he's building a thriving community that's growing every single day. We have to get back to that mindset. This whole, it's only up to the parents. It's the parents' fault. No, it's the whole village's fault. The village has been destroyed by drugs and alcohol and chasing pleasure for the past 50, 60 years. And the music supports this. So even if we don't have a lot of power over the laws or a lot of power over our economics in a sense, for now, that's a temporary situation. At some point, we're going to get back to where we were before social and economic integration and before the proliferation of drugs and crime in our community. We're going to get back to that point. But in order for us to get back to that point, we really have to take a step back and assess the situation that we're currently in as far as our economics, our education, our food supply, the criminals in our community, the relationships we're getting into. Assess all of these things and evaluate how we can make changes immediately within our own circle, right? A circle of 10 women or 10 families coming together to buy a couple of acres of land, right? And you all have a duty of responsibility to help maintain the land. There can be people who work within the system. They have a job and they help pay for certain things. And there are people within that little clique who are there to watch the babies. And then everybody helps to grow the food. Like, it is not impossible to come up with an alternative system for us to rebuild our villages that have been destroyed by music, media, the government, you know, sellouts, right? Men and women selling out for a bag. We got to get back to who we used to be back in the day so that when they release these criminals back on the streets, we have a defense mechanism to protect our children and our family from these wayward criminals. And we can offer rest haven and security and support to other people who are not a part of our little enclave to protect them from the wayward animals too. And I'm calling them animals because they refer to themselves as animals as well, right? When we try to hold these men accountable for the crimes they're committing, what do they say? They say, welcome to the jungle. In the jungle, you have predator and you have prey. These men are naturally wolves. They're naturally going to hunt for prey. So because these men are animals and they can't control themselves, we now have to devise a system to protect our children and the women and the men who are supportive and loving and productive from these wayward animals who are terrorizing the streets. I mean, I would think at some point the Black community will be tired of complaining about the same old stuff every single year. The same mess. Economics, housing, security, education, food, jobs. Like, at some point, we got to take a hint. Okay, we have to do this for ourselves and not say, well, back in the day when we did it, they destroyed us. Okay, but what we're doing now is destroying us too. So I'd rather us be destroyed as we're trying to build than us self-cannibalizing, okay? And destroying each other because we hate each other, because we don't feel like we are worth anything, because we haven't had a community or a village for the past 50, 60 years. Imagine, the first wave of the drug epidemic started in the 70s. That is 50 years ago. That is 2 to 3 generations. The millennials and Generation X and Generation Alpha, we have to make sure we don't fall in the same trap our grandparents and parents fell into for the past 50 years. We cannot chase pleasure. We have to seek happiness and fulfillment. Happiness and fulfillment is hard work, but it's sustainable. Pleasure is immediate and it goes away once the high of whatever you've just done is gone, right? Whether it's sex or drinking or drugs, it's gone after whatever buzz wears off. But when you're happy and fulfilled, that lasts a lifetime. It just takes a lot of work to get there. And a lot of us have become lazy, or we've become so insecure and we don't think we have the ability to manifest happiness because we don't even know that we're unhappy. We're used to being miserable and everybody around us is miserable. I'm speaking in generalities. I'm not saying all Black people. There are some Black folks with wonderful lives and they should be a model for the rest of society, right? The Black people who have managed to build stable thriving, successful families and communities. They should be a model for the rest of us in the population who have not managed to achieve that yet. Instead of hating on them and calling them square and bougie, we should be emulating them as a community instead of emulating these ignorant rappers and their ratchet girlfriends. We as a community should be stepping away from that representation of who they want us to be. Okay? The organizations and the institutions and the people and their secret cabals, right? They want us to be where we are today. That's why we've had Bloods and Crip gangs for 50 years. And the Black Panthers were dismantled within 10 years. They were attacked out the gate. They know what they're doing. They attacked us on the music front. They attacked us on the economic front. They attacked us on the academic front, the educational front. They attacked us on defense and nutrition. They attacked our relationships. Every single element of our lives that we could use to protect ourselves from their assault, they attacked every single simultaneously. They know who they are, and you guys know who they are too. So they systematically dismantle our culture for the past 50, 60 years to create this blackteria, okay? Yes, blackteria. And the blackteria was created in this petri dish of the hood, right? Where there's violence and gangs and drugs and, you know, lack of resources and opportunity and brainwashing. All of this was put in this little petri dish. And now that they've done their job, they're ready to release the bacteria into the general population and say, see, this is how these black folk really are. See what happens when you give these people freedom? Forget the fact that we have systematically destroyed their culture for the past 50 years. No, this is who they are now. Forget the past. Forget what we did to these people. This is how they look now. They're blackteria. They're dangerous. They're wicked. They're violent. They're this and that and the third. They don't care about their kids. This is the way they wanted us to be. But I'm going to save the rest of my message for part 2. I look forward to reading your comments. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I will speak to you soon.